In this video, I'm going to go back and talk a little bit now about quick process. Over the last several modules, you've spent time designing and modeling and building a process in BizFlow. And it's a fairly simple process, a two-step process with a form that was pre-built. In this exercise, what you're going to do is create a simple two-step process using quick process, really to help you kind of see the differences between these two tools. First, I'm going to log in to our web portal here. And we're going to go to the Start New menu. And we're going to start a quick process. Only this time, we're actually going to create a new process template. So the concept is you can create a process template, and then you can reuse that process. If we wanted to, for example, and one of the things that quick process is very good for is collaborating on documents. One example might be training documents or marketing collateral, and you want people to be able to upload documentation and then have people review and approve that documentation. So quick process is a very good tool for that type of purpose. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start creating a new process. And the wizard walks us through the steps involved in what we need to do. The very first thing is we're going to name our process, and we can name it my first quick process and my name. And you can provide a description for the process, so this could be a review of collateral. The next section asks for a checklist. When a user gets a quick process task, there's a checklist on the side panel. And it's just a way that if you were monitoring this process and you kind of wanted to see at a glance what's been accomplished, you can add a quick checklist so as people perform things, they could actually check off those items. And that checklist may not necessarily correlate directly to activities. So you might have 2 or 3 checklist items for a given activity in the process. We're going to go ahead and add some checklist items. And to do that, we simply start to type in the area for the checklist. So our first item will be review document. And now if we want to add another checklist item, we can simply click the add and we can add several items. Now that we have our checklist items, we can assign a deadline. This is the overall process deadline. Now the assumption is that I'm going to create this process and actually execute it at this time, the first time, and then I can reuse it later, which is why it's asking for a deadline. So let's say we're going to make the deadline at the end of this week. The share option allows us to share this process with other people. So if I wanted to create this template so that anybody in the organization could use it or other people could initiate and change and modify this process, I could share it with other people in the organization. And of course I can do that with groups or individual users. I could search for a given user or a group, and I can add them to the list of people with whom I want to share. And now it asks for any attachments. I'm going to design this process to review and share collateral. I'm going to make an attachment then for the first type of collateral I'm going to be asking for input on. And again, when I rerun this process later in the future, I can modify this attachment to be any attachment that I would like to have reviewed. And now I'm going to add my steps in the process, and I'm going to add 2 steps. I'm going to review document or documents, and I'm going to add a second step for approve documents. So I see my checklist. I have now my 2 steps in the process, and the next step is going to be to add the details to each of these steps. This is where we would assign who needs to perform the review documents task, and for the purpose of this exercise, we're going to use the initiator. Whomever initiates the process, which is going to be myself, it's going to go into my inbox to perform both tasks. And again, this is just so that you can perform both steps in the activity. And this would be the guidance. So I might ask this person, please review, update, or comment, and then send for approval. And we can assign a deadline, and let's say we want to make that the close of business today. The next part here is can collaborate or share with others. Using Office Engine, you can break out of this process, and this individual who gets assigned the task can use BizFlow Tasking or BizFlow Office Engine to collaborate with other people if necessary. So this person may be able to review this documentation, or maybe they need input from other people. By checking this option, can collaborate, you can also see that it enables this set default collaboration. With whom am I allowing this person to collaborate? In a very large organization, you may have many groups within an organization, and so you may not want this person to work with everybody in the organization. So you want to selectively choose certain users or groups. That's what this allows you to do, is define a set of users or groups this person collaborate with. If not, they can collaborate with anybody that's in the Office Engine user group in BizFlow. Can add additional checklist items. Can this person add other checklist items to the checklist? And can they delete them? And of course, can they check them off as they perform them? Permissions. Can they edit the process outline? Can they reject the item, and can they end the entire process? These are features where if they can reject the item, they could send it back to a previous step. Now this is the first step in the process, so being able to reject really doesn't make too much sense, but for the second step, we would want to be able to reject or reply so we could send it back to the previous step in the process. Can edit the process outline. Can I add additional details or additional steps in this process is what that's allowing me to do. And then can I end the entire process? If you click Next Task, that's going to bring you now to the next step in the process, and we would do the same thing. Now that we have our task details defined, we can now move to the next step. And apparently I didn't have a deadline set. It was earlier than the deadline of the overall process, or later I should say, and so that won't work. This now is reminders. And the reminders go to the initiator of the process. The person that's going to get the task is going to get an email to notify them that they have a task. So that's automatically going to happen. But as the person who's initiating this process, these reminders let me know where the state of this work is. I'll be aware if a task is overdue, let's say. I can get a reminder sent to me to let me know, to be aware of the fact that the person I assigned this to hasn't gotten it done in the time frame that I was expecting. And I can send an email, or I can send a text message. Or both. Now we can review and go. And at this point, I could simply run the process. Now, when I go to my work list, I'm going to see the first activity here in my process, review documents in my quick process. I also received an email. And one of the things when you're working on this activity, to receive emails under your preferences, under the notification tab, you would need to have your email entered into this area, and I did not, so I will not actually get my email. And now going forward, any tasks that get assigned to me will get an email. So in the second step, we'll see that email. And now, just like a BizFlow activity, I have the task. And what I see is the guidance that we had provided for this individual. This is the collaboration. So this is where they can assign other people to assist them with this activity if necessary. And then here's the attached document that I'm asking them to review. And just like an email, this is an attachment and I would be able to make modifications to this, but when I do, I would have to save it to my desktop, those changes, and then upload or reattach those revisions to the process as an attachment to the process or as an attachment to the collaboration activities. When I'm ready, I can send this now to the approver, and here's where I could upload or attach any revisions I might have made to that document. Now, of course, because both were set to the initiator, I now also have the approval task. So here I have approved documents in my first quick process, and here's where, again, I would get an email notification. And you can see this was a previous email while we're waiting for the actual email to come in, but you can see what that email would look like. So I would get a notification that simply says you've been assigned to review these documents or approve these documents, whatever the task may be. And I can click directly in that email, and that's going to bring me to the task that I need to complete. Now, of course, I can open that item up, and I can see what the previous step, revisions attached, were. I can see that I have the first document, and now I have the second document attachment. And of course, you would want to put revision 1, 2, 3, or what have you on these documents so you know the version, but you know the history or the order by which they're attached. The other thing that we can see are the checklist items and then any discussions. So what should have happened in the first step is I should have made these checklist items, and then here in this final step I can do a final review and approve. I also mentioned that you could edit the process outline. So let's say this approver is agreeable or accepts these changes but still wants someone else to approve this item. So you could in fact allow this person to add another approval step in the process, and by having checked the can edit process outline, that's what's enabling me to add this additional step in the process. But you can deny someone from doing that, so you can actually turn it off, so this would be the last and final step in the process. Now, if I wanted to reuse that same process over and over again, I could go to Quick Process and select Start. And now, instead of creating a new process, I can select an already existing process. Here I have my first quick process that we created, and I can select that. And now I can either run it, but of course I want to change the attachment that was made. So this would be the next collateral item that I may want to have reviewed. I could add any additional checklist items, I could change the assignees and dates, and then simply run the process again. So you can see for very simple processes, especially those that are very document-centric or collaborative in nature, where you're collaborating on attachments or documents, Quick Process is a very fast way to implement that type of process, and it can be done by somebody with very limited skill set in terms of knowing BizFlow. I don't need the studio, I don't need to know how to model, I don't need to know how to do a lot of things. I simply walk through this wizard and I can create and manage my own processes.